Welcome back to Andromeda. I am finishing up the fan pieces for this month's block, and I promised you guys that I would come back and show you how to do the curved piece on the top of that, what they call the vein. So I have my partially finished fan here without the top curve on. So this is what all the normal paper piecing looks like. Keep in mind that when you are looking at the pattern and doing your thing, so mine has the light pieces in the interior part and the darker pieces on the outer part. The pictures in the pattern are just grayscale, and they actually have this darker. So make sure that you're not assuming that that's going to be your darker fabric. Really make sure that when you're cutting those out, that you're making sure that you know which fabric is which, so that you don't mess that up and have it be backwards of what you thought it was going to be. Anyway, so we're going to turn this back over, and what you're going to do is you have on this curve, you have a basting stitch line and you have a sew line. So what you're going to do is you're actually going to lengthen your stitch so that you have a basting stitch. You don't want that teeny tiny one. You're going to lengthen your stitch out, and you are going to baste that line. And the reason for that is going to be your 1/4 inch mark, because we can't fold it back and use a straight line to trim that off and all of that. We're using that basting line as our 1/4 inch mark for our seam allowance. While you're at it, you want to go ahead and also mark this TRP line. So I just granny stitched all of my basting stitches, trimmed them up or cut them apart, and then came back and did this TRP line. I went ahead and just did it all the way across so that I didn't miss anything. It's not a big deal. So when you finish up, this is what it's going to look like. And if I flip it over, you can see those stitch marks, no stitch lines. So I have this TRP line here, which designates the center of my fan. And then I have this basting line. And you can see that all of my fabrics are beyond that basting stitch line. That's what we want. I don't want anything below that basting stitch line, so that I have everything within that 1/4 inch seam allowance. Now the next step that you're going to do is you're going to take your vein, your curved piece. It doesn't specifically say this in the instructions, but you're actually going to take this paper off. This is going to make it easier to get on to your fabric. Being careful not to rip out those TRP lines that you've got. So then with my fan face up, right sides up, I am going to turn my curved piece wrong side up so that the right sides are together. And I'm going to match up those TRP lines so that it sits like a smiley face on top of my fan. Then I'm going to grab a hold of that, and I'm going to pin those center pieces together. That's going to make it nice and solid to start putting this on. The next thing that you need is a glue stick. We're not using the repositional glue for this, although this is a repositional glue, but it does leave more residue than the repositional glue stick. So there's Fons and Porter's, there's Soline. You can get several different brands of these. But essentially, it is this little glue stick, and it has refills. In fact, I had to order more because I'm on my last one. But you just pop these in and out of the case. So you don't have to keep buying more of the pen parts. You can just buy the refills. So what you're going to do is I am going to make a glue line just below the basting strip within that 1/4 inch mark. I try to keep as much of it within that 1/4 inch seam allowance as possible so that it doesn't get onto my fabric. It will wash off, but it does leave a little bit of residue. So I try to keep as much of that within that 1/4 inch as possible. If you're slower, you want to do short bursts of it versus the whole length of it so that your glue doesn't dry out, because then you'll just be wasting glue. So I'm going to go about halfway across, having my glue there. Now, what I'm going to do is I am going to just very carefully, without stretching the fabric, I want to just gently align the raw edge next to that baseline where I've got my glue. So you can see that it fans up. That is what I want because I'm pulling it the opposite direction. Then when I've got to the end of my glue line, I'm going to finish that out. And we're just fingering this. I am not pulling on it. I am not stretching it in any way. I am just reordering it to go the other direction. Okay. So now I'm going to go do the other side. So I'm going to put my glue. Then I'm going to very carefully, just as I do this, I kind of pull the curve so that it goes the other direction, but I'm not stretching it. And that's really important. I don't want to stretch that being on the bias because that's going to skew it. You're going to get pleats. It's not going to lay flat for you. So it does take a little bit of practice. And the nice thing about this glue is if you do mess up, you can pull it up and reposition it. You may have to add a little bit more glue, but you can pull it up. It's not permanent. So now you can see that I have my curve the other direction and everything is below that basting stitch line, just barely. And you can see I have fan folds in this upper piece. That is okay. That is what we want. So now, so you can see I've got this one. I still have my pin in and everything is fan folded nicely. Okay. Now to get this sewn on like this, what you're going to do, and I'm going to bring you over to my machine so I can show you, is you're actually going to hold your fabric up instead of laying it flat. So what we're going to do is I'm going to bring it over to the machine. And I have the vein side here, so my basting stitch is going to be along the side of my presser foot. I do have a 1/4 inch presser foot on. But what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to hold this up. I don't want it laid flat. I'm going to hold this up so that that fabric underneath that is pleated has room to sit nicely underneath. So then I'm going to make sure that my stitch length is lowered again, that 3 to 4 below normal. And then I'm going to start this out. And as you hold your fabric up, because it's acting kind of like a pivot point. So I can actually just very carefully, as I hold it up, pivot that fabric so that it makes that corner, makes that curve. And I'm stitching along sew line 10, but I'm holding it up so that that fabric underneath has room to stay pleated and it won't pinch and pleat within your seam allowance. Okay, that's the important part. We don't want it to cause pleats within the seam allowance. Okay, so now we're going to come back. We've got our piece sewn onto our fan. Okay, so now the next step is going to be to iron this out so that it matches, or it's open, nice and open. So you want to make sure that when you iron, I try to iron in the center first and then work my way out to the side. You shouldn't really have folds or pleats within that piece. Okay, and you can see it did kind of get wavy a little bit. That's okay. We're going to trim this up so that it is nice and perfect. But you're going to iron it out. If you do have a little fold, you can try to iron that out. You can always go back and rip out those seams and try again. The glue helps hold it in place, but if you have not spread it far enough, or if you have overstretched, you're going to get something, you know, kind of like this. If you can see that I have some wrinkles in it. So we don't want to overstretch it when we are putting that on. That's why we just gently finger press that in and we're not pulling and stretching, because then you're going to get those pleats in there. So now we have our piece, but we also have a lot of extra fabric up here that we don't want. So I'm going to show you how to get rid of that. So the first thing that we're going to do is we are going to trim up this piece on the outside edge. So the outermost solid line, we're going to trim this up. You can use whatever ruler works for you. I have my outer quarter right here. It's straight line, so it works. All right, so now we have the bottom piece all cleaned up and nice. Now we have to do that curve. So I'm going to do the same thing that I did when cutting those curved pieces. I'm going to keep my rotary cutter relatively straight. I'm going to push forward with my rotary cutter and I'm going to rotate the fabric going nice and slow. This isn't a race. I don't have to go super fast on these. I want to make sure that I am cutting it nice and straight along that line. Okay. So now I have that cut, but I still have all of that extra fabric underneath that's not within that 1/4 inch line, and we don't want that hanging out. There's no reason for it. So what we're going to do is I am going to have my paper side down, and I'm going to now bring this vein accent piece folded back, okay? And then I am going to cut just the inside of that basting line with my rotary cutter. Again, same concept. I want to make sure that my vein stays out of the way, but that essentially is going to give me that scant 1/4 inch all the way around. So you're going to be getting rid of your paper for that vein and this excess fabric along with the basting stitch. Some people do just trim up right next to that basting strip so that you can keep your paper on. It's not really going to matter as long as you don't pull for the next step. So the next template pieces are going to go onto this. If for whatever reason your TRP line has come out and you can't see those holes, at this point, go ahead and remark those TRP lines. But we're going to go ahead and trim this up. And you may actually want to hold off on those TRP lines until you get this piece done, because that's going to attach it to the fabric behind. My TRP lines are still in, so I don't really have to worry about it. But I'm cutting the way that I have it, just to the left of my basting stitch. So next on the side closest to my sew line, but I'm just inside that basting stitch so that I am leaving that 1/4 inch seam allowance. Then I'm going to take this back over to the iron and iron it back open nice and flat. The TRP line that is on the green, you can take out, but leave what's in the vein, because that's going to show you where that attaches to the templates that we will put on next. Okay, so those are the steps on how to put the vein on. It is really important that you take the time to glue that vein on properly so that you'll get it nice and flat. If you try to just slap it on, oh, I can just hold it and go around that curve, that is not going to work well for you. Also, make sure that you have it, when you put it under your machine, that you do have it paper side up. I know normally when we have something smaller, we leave it on top, but that's not the case with this one. So we're actually going to have it paper side up, big side up, and then lift that up. And that should give you a nice curve line. And you shouldn't have major pleats or anything like that. So I hope that helps you out. I'm going to finish these guys up, and then we will move on to the template. The template is going to be very similar to how we just did these. And so you'll see a lot of the same techniques in that, but we're going to have a lot more fabric that we're going to have to fold up. So good luck getting your veins on, and I will see you next time for getting those templates attached. And then these pieces will be completed to be able to put them together next month. So happy sewing and have a great day.